2023, Saturday the 15th of July. You're very welcome. So let's get started. I am running a bit late this week, guys. I had a very busy week, so apologies for that. I'm going out on Saturday rather than Friday. This week I want to talk to you about the fediverse. I've been thinking a lot about the fediverse again this week, reading about it in terms of how it's been applied, or how it will be applied, I should say, to threads.net. So according to their website, Meta intend to make Threads part of the fediverse. Quote, "Our plan is to make Threads part of the fediverse, a social network of different servers operated by third parties that are connected and can communicate with each other. Each server on the fediverse operates on its own, but can talk to other servers on the fediverse that run the same protocol. We plan for Threads to use a protocol called ActivityPub to talk to other servers that support this protocol." End quote. So if that goes ahead, that would make Threads the main user of the ActivityPub protocol that now powers Mastodon and other smaller fediverse sites, effectively becoming the dominant user in the space with the largest user base by far. So in plain English, what exactly is the fediverse? The fediverse is taking a concept from computer science called distributed computing, and it's applying that to a social network. So what you're effectively doing is you're removing central control from the network and you're distributing responsibility to enable the network to effectively regulate itself. So this is often called distributed computing, and it's a well understood approach to enable applications to scale across networks. So in theory, when applied to a social media platform, it's meant to empower the users of that platform to have more freedom, to make it more democratic, to make it more free. Sounds great in theory, but in my opinion, all existing social media fediverse implementations are not truly free, because if you can ban a user or you can block an instance, they actually do have central authority. From what I've seen so far with the ActivityPub protocol, it's not really possible to block an individual user, but you can block instances, and there are block lists being distributed amongst the various different server admins. In some instances, I've heard of entire servers being banned on Mastodon, for example, resulting in ghettos forming. So what you're effectively doing is you're going to split the social network into different ghettos, where people only want people in their neighborhood, let's say, who they like, who they agree with, who they are, politically aligned with, let's say, and they don't want people coming in who have different views. So they start to block each other's instances, and this is something that will happen organically over time with the ActivityPub protocol or similar protocols. Effectively, it's a weakness in the protocol. If you enable any kind of a ban, it's not truly distributed. It's not truly a fediverse. Instead, what you've got is you've got lots of little villages that have walls around them, rather than one big city where everybody lives happily. So how do we fix this? So in my opinion, the first fediverse that uses the blockchain will actually win this market, as blockchains are the closest thing we have got to a truly decentralized platform. So for those that are not too familiar with blockchains and crypto and Web3, a blockchain is effectively a distributed ledger. So if you think about an old-fashioned ledger, it's a big book that you write entries into. And you start from the first page and you work your way all the way to the last page, and you record various transactions. That's something that's been around for hundreds of years. A distributed ledger is where multiple people have the same copy of transactions. So we don't have a single copy of that ledger, we have multiple identical copies of that ledger spread all over the internet. That's effectively what a blockchain is. And it's encrypted. So what that means is that the distribution of those transactions is done in a secure way at a protocol level. And it's a really brilliant innovation. And nobody owns a blockchain. It is truly distributed. There's no central authority, and there's no concept of part of the blockchain becoming disconnected from the other part of the blockchain, for example, because some server admin decides they want to block some instances. It just doesn't support that at a protocol level. Now, right now, of course, in most people's minds, when they hear blockchain, they think crypto, they think Bitcoin, they think all of those things are intrinsically linked. But the reality is that, in my opinion anyway, I think blockchain technologies have a vibrant second life beyond fintech ahead of them. So at the moment, they're only being used in fintech or financial technology. So they've been used for financial use cases like cryptocurrencies, like NFTs, etc. And that's fine. I have no issue with that. But I think they can be applied to many other domains. And I think one domain that they could be applied to is social media. Now, it's not that straightforward. There are some challenges. One feature of a ledger is that once something is written into the ledger, it's called immutable. So it can't change. It's a record. It's a historical fact. And it's not something that you can go back later and edit. And that's by design. And that's the intent of a ledger. If you think about a ledger in the accountancy world, obviously if a financial transaction has taken place, nobody has any business going back and editing the details of that transaction on the ledger after the fact. In fact, that would probably be fraudulent. So distributed ledgers, it's the same concept. It's immutable. So once something goes into the blockchain, it stays there. It remains as is. That particular record, that particular piece of data on the blockchain, that token, it's immutable. It's not going to mutate into something else. So, of course, an immutable blockchain ledger would make user content edits difficult, but not impossible if the ledger contains a content token, like, for example, the way NFTs work today, rather than the content itself. So in plain English, what's in the ledger is a pointer to the content, but not the content itself. So that means that the pointer to the content won't change, but that the content itself, which could be outside of the ledger or outside of the blockchain, it can change, which would enable edits and indeed even deletes. So we won't be reinventing the problem of Twitter where, famously it doesn't have a support for edits. Well, it does these days, but you have to pay. So Twitter has never had a federated backend. It's never been part of the so-called fediverse. But in the early days, it was extremely distributed on the front end. Can you imagine, for example, that the first few years I used Twitter, I exclusively used third-party clients. Back in those days, as a Palm WebOS fanboy, shout out to fellow fanboys that may be listening. There's probably 100 of us left in the world. My Twitter UX was an application called Bad Kitty. And before Twitter shut down access to third-party clients like these, every user was using their own personal favorites. So if you can imagine, very few users at that stage in the early days of Twitter were using the official Twitter clients. They were using third-party clients, and everybody was using different clients depending on their preference. So while the backend wasn't federated, it was centrally controlled. The clients were not centrally controlled. The clients were actually quite free and open. You could use whatever client you wished. And unfortunately, it's been in more recent years. This is before Elon Musk's takeover. This was under Jack Dorsey. They started to restrict access to the API for third-party client developers because Twitter naturally realized that they were losing eyeballs. People were not looking at Twitter via Twitter clients, so that was obviously cutting into their advertising revenue. Instead, they were bypassing those clients and accessing the Twitter data directly via the API using third-party clients that did not display ads. So obviously that was no good for Twitter's bottom line. So they basically cut that out in recent years, which is a shame. But I get why they've done it from a business perspective. So personally, I yearn for a truly federated social media platform that uses a blockchain on the back end for distributed storage with no centralized API, no centralized authority, no shared block lists, and the freedom to use any third-party client that I want. For me, that's the dream, but the reality is that that doesn't exist from anybody. Nobody is providing that. Even the people who are claiming that they have a fediverse, they don't. It just sounds cool, but when you look at it closely, they really don't meet the criteria. They have partial implementations, but they don't have true implementations. I think, for example, where you want to block users because they're being annoying, those blocks can happen at the client level, but it should never be happening at the instance level. Once you start kicking people outside of the club, it's no longer a public club, it's a private club, and you've introduced some authority. And there's nothing new here, guys. The concept of a fediverse was coined back in 2008 with a service called Identica. Quote, in 2008, Evan Prodomue founded the social network Identica. He published a software under a free license, the GNU Afro General Public License, or AGPL. It defined the O-status protocol, end quote. That's a quote from the Wikipedia page on the Fediverse. I'll link in the notes. But essentially, that O-status protocol, we can think about it as being a precursor to the ActivityPub protocol that Mastodon uses today and Threads are planning to move to. So there's nothing new here. There's been a lot of work going on for years to try to come up with an open protocol for social networks. And I think that's admirable. I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. But I think the underlying blockchain protocols are actually better at this stuff. They're more efficient. I think the implementations are better, and I think they're actually more open. I think those protocols are more suitable. So Mastodon is not using the blockchain for distribution, and some of the documentation is actively hostile towards Web3. I reference a couple of these in the notes for this podcast. But when you look at the language that they're using, they're very adamant that they're not part of Web3 and they're not part of that community. They see Web3 as being exclusively a fintech thing. It's capitalism. It's dirty, and it doesn't really sit with their political standpoint. So they're very hostile towards even the idea of using something like a blockchain, which is a shame because I think it's actually better technology. And I don't understand why people are insisting on seeing blockchains as being exclusively something for finance and capitalism. The technology doesn't care, guys. The technology does not have any political beliefs. It's kind of dumb, but hey ho. Now, I've done a bit of research on this during the week, and I wanted to see if anybody was actually attempting to build a Twitter-like service on top of Web3 protocols. And I did find that there are some POCs that exist out there on the internet. I will also link to those in the notes for this podcast. But I would say that they're more like technology demos at this stage, or POCs, proof of concepts. They're working, you can take the code, you can run the code. Most of them seem to sit on top of Ethereum. And they look cool. They show that this can be done. But I don't think anybody has done this at scale. I haven't seen anybody who's put any of these POCs into production. And indeed, I don't see anybody planning to do this, which is a bit of a shame that we've got this underlying foundational technology, these protocols in the Web3 community that are actually perfect for doing large-scale distributed transactional systems, which is effectively what a social network is, but they're being ignored because they've been, tarnished in some people's minds as being, oh, that's money, that's finance, that's dirty, and that's not something I want to get involved with. So instead, they're going off and they're inventing different protocols, which are more or less trying to do the same thing, but those protocols have some levers in place that they can pull on to basically gatekeep, which in my mind, it goes against the ethos of having an open internet. So it actually makes me feel uncomfortable that they're going that route instead of going the route of using something that is actually truly open. So it's a very interesting space, and I think what's going to be very interesting to see as well is when Meta move into this ActivityPub space, they will become the 600-pound gorilla in that space, and they will naturally start to influence the direction of those open standards. I think about in the past, for example, as a long-term PHP user, when Meta got involved, it was Facebook back then, when they got involved heavily in the PHP community, they brought out their own fork of PHP, in fact, called Hack, which had many fantastic optimizations to that language. And then they started to share that with the open source PHP community, and it actually made PHP better, especially around version 8. It started to get really faster. And a lot of that was the learnings that Facebook was able to bring to the table from running PHP at massive scale on Facebook.com. So what Meta are going to do is they're going to bring knowledge of running services at scale to the ActivityPub community. Already, Threads.net has greatly eclipsed the user base of Mastodon. It's already at about 100 million users, and it's just going to grow and grow. So they're going to get experience running ActivityPub at a scale that Mastodon will never reach. And there's some really brilliant engineers inside Meta. So what they're going to start to do is they're going to start to optimize that protocol. They're going to start to make improvements. They're going to make enhancements. They're going to make it better. But also, they're going to end up leading it. They're going to end up setting the direction. So, again, if you're at Mastodon, or you're like in the existing fediverse and you're looking at this, you may not necessarily be happy with this huge corporation moving into your neighborhood, but that's exactly what they're going to do. That's what Facebook do, or Meta, I should say. So this is going to be a very interesting space to watch, and I'm definitely going to be getting my popcorn out for this one in the months ahead. So apart from thinking about the fediverse, what else did I do this week? I done some work on grepper.org, which is my web search engine hobby project that I've been building for the last few months. So I've got it to 2 million pages indexed now. So if you go to grepper.org and run a search, you'll see that it's listing down the bottom that there's about 2 million pages indexed. I also added in time field supports on each of those search results, so it'll now show you the age of the result. So if it's within the last few hours, if it's within the last few days, last few months, etc., you'll see that now on the UI. It'll show you exactly how recent or how old that particular index entry is. And now that I have those time fields in there, it opens up the possibility to also do filters and sorts based upon time. So that's live now. I put it live today, in fact, and I will continue to monitor that, and we'll continue to work on adding new functionality around time-based queries. Apart from that, some media that I enjoyed this week, I'm still reading Longitude by Dava Sobel, which is about the breakthroughs in early clock technology to try to enable sailors to accurately predict their longitude when they were navigating around the world. It's a fascinating historical read. And I also watched the House of the Dragon TV show, which was a spin-off from Game of Thrones. Hadn't actually seen that yet. It's about a year old, but eventually decided to go and watch it. I think I delayed watching it because I was so burnt out from the final season of Game of Thrones that I just didn't want to go back and go through all of that again. But I actually enjoyed it. It was pretty good. I didn't love it. I didn't love it certainly as much as the first few seasons of the main Game of Thrones serial. I thought that was exceptional. But it was certainly better than the second half of the Game of Thrones serial. So I would put it somewhere in the middle, and definitely recommend it to anybody who is casually interested in that world. Okay, so I will leave it there and get back to enjoying my weekend. I will hope to get my podcast out on time next week. I'm still planning to also release an episode of the Tech Leadership series. I am also working on a script for that episode on turning up at meetings. I've just been delayed on all such activities this week because, frankly speaking, I've just been extremely busy. I've been flat out. But I wanted to get this episode out today, at least, to keep the rhythm going of weeklies. So I will speak to you next week, and I hope you have a great weekend. Take care. Bye bye.